Hey everyone, welcome back. My name is Mac, and today we're talking about how to increase your damage in Mythic Plus. I've seen a ton of comments on YouTube and my Discord from Elemental players all saying the same thing. Their damage feels fine or fantastic during their Ascendance window, but once that window ends, they struggle to keep up with other DPS and maybe even the tanks. As you already know, Elemental is a super cooldown reliant spec, and once Ascendance ends, it can feel incredibly slow. So in this video, I wanted to go over one very simple thing you can do to smooth this out and massively improve your downtime damage. But before we get to the how, I need to quickly touch on the why, because understanding why this happens is important to implementing the fix. What it really comes down to is momentum and tempo. The reason Elemental feels so bad outside of Ascendance isn't just because your cooldowns are down, it's that if you start a pull dry, it will take forever for your damage to actually get going. You finish one pack, dump everything into it, and then you follow the tank into the next pull with absolutely nothing in the tank. Zero Maelstrom, zero Stormkeeper charges, nothing. So you spam Chain Lightning, wait to finally build enough Maelstrom for an Earthquake, and then until that happens, you're just doing tank damage. Then you finally get that first Earthquake out, and if it doesn't refund, which, let's be honest, it probably won't, you're going right back to that Chain Lightning spam again, trying to build for the next one. This isn't a damage problem, this is a momentum problem. You're spending a lot more of your damage time trying to get your engine started, and that entire time you're not doing any meaningful damage. By the time you get rolling, the pack's already half dead, and now your damage looks terrible, not because the spec can't do damage, but because you spent the entire time trying to reach the point where your spec can actually deal damage. So the fix here is to prime the engine before the next pack even starts, and you can do that one of two ways: pooling Maelstrom and Stormkeeper. Stormkeeper is pretty obvious, so let's talk about the Maelstrom. When a pull is about to die, try to leave it with around 120 Maelstrom. That way, when the tank goes into the next pack, you're not walking in empty. You are primed with enough gas to immediately drop down 2 Earthquakes and get your damage rolling immediately. And this matters a lot more than just the Earthquake damage, because those 2 spenders do more than just that upfront damage. Firstly, and most basically, they immediately put out 2 Lightning Rods, which means your damage profile comes online much earlier in the pull. But more importantly, those 2 Earthquakes have a chance through Aftershock procs to refund your Maelstrom, which leads directly into even more Earthquakes. But it goes even further than that, because every Earthquake you send also has a decent chance to proc Tempest, and Tempest gives its own Lightning Rod and generates a Stormkeeper charge for another instant cast Chain Lightning. And then that instant cast Chain Lightning gives you more Maelstrom, which means more Earthquakes, which means more chances at refunds, more rods, more Tempests, and more instant cast Stormkeeper procs. And that is the whole point. If you don't have Stormkeeper and you don't have Maelstrom going into a pull, Elemental takes so long to get going that you're basically starting every race in last place, and spending the beginning of every pack trying to catch up to where your damage should have already been. Meanwhile, if you go in primed and ready, you skip the dead setup phase and go straight into the part of the spec where everything starts feeding into itself. So when people say their damage feels amazing in Ascendance, but outside of it, that's the reason why. Outside of cooldowns, Elemental can't afford to keep resetting its momentum between packs. If you carry Maelstrom or Stormkeeper forward, you can carry that tempo forward as well. And just to be clear here, doing this is not suddenly going to make you top DPS on every single pull. Elemental just does not work that way. But what it will do is keep you competitive from pack to pack, and more importantly, keep you far away from the dreaded tank damage outside of your Ascendance window. But then when Ascendance is up, it's your time to shine, and where you can really push damage to levels that very few specs can match. But with that out of the way, let's take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. To showcase how this can affect your damage, I spent 30 seconds hitting target dummies in 4 different scenarios. One with no Maelstrom or Stormkeeper, one pull with 120 Maelstrom and no Stormkeeper, one pull with no Maelstrom and Stormkeeper, and one pull with 120 Maelstrom and Stormkeeper. You'll notice that the pull starting from 0 Maelstrom and no Stormkeeper at all starts off incredibly slow, just spamming Chain Lightning until we get enough Maelstrom to just send some Earthquakes. And I send my first Earthquake, and unfortunately get super unlucky with no Aftershock procs or Tempest procs, so I'm right back to sending more Chain Lightnings. If we move over to the 120 Maelstrom pull, I send 1 Earthquake, immediately get an Aftershock proc, and then get a Tempest proc as well, setting us up for a Tempest into a Stormkeeper charge, which jumps our Maelstrom back up high enough to immediately send another Earthquake, which again procs Tempest. But context matters here. You can do everything right, start with 120 Maelstrom, have a Stormkeeper charge ready, and still it just gets nothing. On the other side, it's absolutely possible to start from 0, get lucky, and still have the pull take off. What's important to understand is that Elemental still has random chance built into the core of the spec. So the point here is not that pulling Maelstrom removes the RNG and guarantees a good opener, the point is that it stacks the deck in your favor. If you start with 120 Maelstrom, you're giving yourself immediate spenders. Those spenders can translate into more chances at Aftershock, and those spenders and Aftershock procs translate into more Tempest, and those Tempest charges translate into more Lightning Rod and more Stormkeeper charges, and those Stormkeeper charges mean more Maelstrom generation, which lead into more Earthquakes. So when you pool Maelstrom, what you're really doing is giving yourself the best possible odds of hitting the momentum early instead of waiting and hoping the spec eventually gets there on its own. And you can actually see how swingy this spec is when you look at the other tests. One of the pulls I did started with 0 Maelstrom and Stormkeeper ready, and that pull actually ended up doing more damage than the one where I started with 120 Maelstrom plus Stormkeeper. And that kind of highlights the whole point here. Even when you have the better setup and when you do everything right, the spec can just decide to not cooperate. And on the flip side, you could have a worse setup but get lucky with procs and the whole thing just takes off anyways. That's just how Elemental works. So again, the goal here is not to guarantee better damage every single pull, the goal is to give yourself better odds. Because over the course of the dungeon, those odds matter a lot more than any one individual pull, and those odds will increase significantly when you start doing this in keys. If you're consistently going into pulls with Maelstrom banked or Stormkeeper ready and giving yourself early chances at Aftershocks and Tempests, you're going to get a lot more of those good pulls where everything lines up well. But more importantly, you're going to avoid a lot of those really bad pulls where you're just sitting there spamming Chain Lightning and not ever really getting going. So even though the spec is random, and even though those individual pulls can be swingy either way, stacking the deck is what makes your overall damage feel more consistent across a key. And that's pretty much the whole point. If you've been struggling with your damage outside of Ascendance, this is one of the easiest things you can do to make the spec feel better in Mythic Plus. You're not trying to remove the randomness from Elemental because you can't. The spec is always going to be a little bit swingy. Sometimes you get the procs and everything takes off, and sometimes it doesn't. What you can do though is stack the deck in your favor. And once you clean that part up, your damage becomes a lot more stable pull to pull, and then when your Ascendance is up, that's when you really get to blast and have fun. So if you've been dealing with this, try it out the next few keys and see how it feels. If this helped you out, make sure to like the video, it really does help me a lot, and if you want more Elemental or general WoW content, make sure to subscribe as well. I've also been streaming over on Twitch every Tuesday, Thursday from 8 PM Eastern, so if you want to hang out, ask questions, or just watch Raid and Keys, feel free to stop by. And if you want to support the channel a little bit more directly, I've got a Patreon link below where I offer coaching and additional content, along with a Discord where you can talk about the spec, ask questions, or just hang out with the community. But yeah, that's all I got for this one, so thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.